really a great honor to be here tonight and to get to share some snippets from my multimedia play, As at the Rabbit and the Wolf, which is very much a piece about healing intergenerational trauma. And it's an incredible moment for me to be here right now. Yesterday, I stepped out of a 6-week silent meditation retreat. And I have to say that I left this retreat feeling a tremendous love for humanity and our potential to heal. We have a great potential to heal. We are actually love, and you can see that when we become silent, and that we have hearts that want to give. We have hearts that want to turn towards our fellow human beings. That's our nature. And so I'm really happy to be able to have this event, this conversation with Noubar at this particular moment. It's sort of intense to come out into the world, but I felt that there would be value in that. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for receiving this. And thank you so much for your kind attention. So just to orient us a little bit, like I said, this is a play about intergenerational trauma and healing, and the mise en scène, like where we are in this play, is in an attic in Aleppo, Syria, in February of 2019, which is when I discovered my great-great-grandfather's Karagöz's shadow puppets that he had salvaged from the Armenian genocide. So when he fled with his wife and 7 children, he also brought along a trunk full of 180 of his puppets. He was a master storyteller. Karagöz was a form of puppetry that spoke truth to power, very subversive political satire. And it's shadow puppetry, so it plays with shadow and light, and it's a form of cinema before cinema, as well as a form of theater. And this discovery for me was about understanding my inheritance from a wider lens, that yes, there is trauma, but I also am a storyteller, and I am a film and theater artist, and actually, I have inherited both of those things. So just the discovery of this really widened my lens and understanding the kind of breadth of the possibility of being with the human experience. So at this juncture of the play, we're early on, it's Act 1, and we're going to read sort of 2 sections. This is, I'll begin with this one story, and we will then stop. I will say we're continuing on to the end of Act 1 and continue into Act 2, and then it will be done. We'll have a conversation. My paternal grandfather put a spell on me. The story goes that I was a 9-month-old baby in my mother's arms the first time I came to Aleppo. It was my mother's first return home since her arranged marriage in the US, and emotional, she stopped at the door. She looked up at the balcony and she saw her first cousin. She ran to him, she hugged and she kissed him. My paternal grandfather, Balthasar, balked, and he muttered under his breath, I didn't know we had a whore for a bride. My maternal grandfather, Bedros, bristled. Take that back, he said. But Balthasar refused. And at the time, my maternal and paternal grandparents were living together in that house. My mom and I stayed for months in this house where she was conceived, in this town where I was baptized, in the ancient 40 Martyrs Armenian Church in Judea in the Old City, where I was gifted my first pair of shoes on my first birthday. I learned to walk in those shoes in that house in Aleppo. After we left Aleppo and returned to the US, my 2 grandfathers got into a physical fight. I'm serious. My maternal grandfather, Bedros, defending his daughter's honor, physically attacked my paternal grandfather, Balthasar. And Balthasar and his wife, my Osana Nene, they fled the house. The next day, as my aunt, was cleaning their now empty bedroom, she noticed that the lamp had been left on. And inside, next to the lit bulb, was my baby shoe, stuffed with a handwritten spell in Turkish and a stick of melting butter. Freaked out, my maternal grandfather called the sheikh. What does the spell mean? He asked the sheikh. And the sheikh responded with his own question. Where is the child who owns the shoe? My granddaughter. She's back in the US now. Oh, good. If the child were here, she'd be dead. I mean, the ocean cuts the potency of the spell. But I'm afraid she will still suffer. And the source of that suffering will come from within this family. My paternal grandfather put a spell on me. I mean, this whole place is about curses and spells.
There's a puff of smoke on the puppet screen. Then appears the veiled woman puppet. Curses, spells, not quite so simple.
Is there a puppet behind me? And is that puppet talking to me?
Sona turns to see the veiled woman and screams. Veiled woman screams. Other puppets appear.
So now we'll move to the end of this act.
Veiled woman appears with a table and letter puppet. Veiled woman blows the letter up screen, and a Sona-sized letter appears. Sona picks it up and reads. 1915.
There was a young, well-to-do Armenian man who had moved to Boston from his village near Hakawati in the Ottoman Empire. And when it came time for him to marry, he went back to his village to find his bride, as was the custom. Early spring, this young man married a lovely Armenian woman named Lucy from his village, and shortly afterwards, they were blessed and became pregnant. And then one day, when Lucy was 5 months pregnant, her husband didn't come home. Instead, she found his head on her doorstep. Her neighbors experienced similar horrors, men taken away in the middle of the night, deportations, and Lucy hid and gave birth to her son on Christmas Day. Months later, she took her infant and began to walk hundreds of miles through the desert, somehow making it to the refugee camps that had sprung up around Aleppo. And here, she raised her poor, fatherless child, a child named Tatoyan. My paternal grandfather, Balthasar, he cursed me. He was cursed by genocide. I had no idea. The story I knew was that he cursed me as a child. He was just mean. I mean, no one ever told me this story. Why does no one talk about this? Why are we leaving these stories in an attic?
Welcome to the kingdom of silence. There is a powerful knock on the door. Puppets and Sona gasps. Electrical blackout.
Why has no one talked about this? Why has no one talked about this? Is it easier to just keep going? I mean, why has no one talked about this?
Knock on the door.
I've never been able to get people to talk about this. Hearing these injustices at the age of 7 from my grandmother's sister in Aleppo, do you know what the Turks did to us? And then not finding them in my history books in Indiana. There was no one. My parents didn't tell me. My grandparents weren't talking about it. This is the kingdom of silence. The whole region is the kingdom of silence. My whole life, a culture of silence. Hearing whispers about the Armenian genocide. And then as a child visiting Aleppo under the regime in Syria. Excuse me, but why is this guy's picture everywhere?
Image of Hafez al-Assad on screen. Image of Bashar al-Assad on puppet screen.
Silence. Well, once in Aleppo, I got slapped in the back of the cab for asking. But I was born asking questions. which is why I turned to books when wanting to hear more about the genocide. I had to do my own digging. I looked everywhere. Peter Balakian's Black Dog Afeyan, about being Armenian American, about his grandmother surviving the genocide, about indicting the American government, who promised to recognize the genocide over and over and over and over again, and only to turn their backs on us. Silence. I turned to teachers. When I went to college, I had the great fortune of being taught by Maya Angelou, and she told me, when something is the truth, you must speak it. No matter what, Miss Tatoyan, you must speak it. I needed to speak, I needed to create, to say what hasn't been said about us, Armenians, and what the Turks did to us.
Knock on the door.
And that's when I met him.
Knock on the door.
Osman Kavala. I walked into his office in Istanbul, and the first thing I saw was a book on the bookshelf, Speaking to One Another. A book in Turkish and Western Armenian, our endangered language. A book about reconciliation. We met. We shared ideas. We emailed about projects. We began to make a vision together. I mean, but this is unbelievable because when I was 5 and my 3-year-old sister hadn't been baptized yet, I said to her, "Tun Türkis, you're a Turk." I mean, I had gotten it in my head as a 5-year-old that she was a heathen, a Turk. The enemy was Turkey, so you don't speak to Turks, you do not trust the Turks. After all, a Turk is a Turk, Turkey. And here I am in the office of Osman Kavala, creating together with a Turk. And I remember seeing a poster in his office, a picture of the slain Armenian-Turkish journalist Hrant Dink, and the poster read Hrant's words, "The Turk must heal the Armenian must heal the Turk." There is no other prescription. There is no other way. Hrant was a close friend to Osman. And now here I was becoming a close friend to a Turk.
The knock is heard again.
Listen, Osman Kavala is a cultural preservationist, a multicultural coexistence person, a dialogue enabler, a weaver, Armenians, Kurds, Turks working together, creating together. The organization he founded is literally called Anadolu Kültür, Turkish for Anatolian culture.
The knock is heard again.
You see, outside that door is a Syrian government agent. And he's here to ask me some questions about the discovery I just had in this attic of my family home. He's about to ask about the puppets. He wants to claim them as Syrian. These puppets are not Syrian. They are not Turkish. They are not Armenian. They don't subscribe to our borders. They belong to all of us. These puppets are Anatolian, Levantine, Middle Eastern.
The knock is heard again. It's noticeably loud.
I wish I could call Osman and ask him, what should I do?
Knock is heard again.
But I can't call Osman.
Image, newsflash, Osman Kavala and 15 rights defenders facing life in prison for Gezi protest.
Because Osman's serving life in prison. That protest, that Gezi protest, he had nothing to do with that protest. Let's not mince words. He is arrested and imprisoned precisely for doing the work he's done. He had me write a eulogy about my Armenian grandmother when she died in the war in Aleppo, and I couldn't bury her. He translated that eulogy into Turkish so that he could have it printed in the biggest progressive newspaper in Turkey. He then connected me to so many other artists, writers, scholars, musicians, Armenians, Turks, Kurds, Syrians, while sending me on a journey throughout Anatolia. To Kharkiv, where 10,000 Armenians are buried in Lake Yujan. To Diyarbakir, where the oldest Armenian church exists in the Middle East. To Antep, where I learned of the secret tunnels underneath the Armenian border. And to Urfa, where I met another young Armenian artist and discovered that his family was connected to my family in the genocide. I mean, Osman Kavala helped me weave together the broken pieces of my Armenian family's past. A Turk. He went on to fund the start of my nonprofit, Hakawati.
Another knock.
I mean, this man was working in a country where insulting Turkishness is against the law, Article 301, in a country where they literally denied the Armenian genocide. Osman Kavala was creating Armenian genocide commemoration events, cultural exhibitions, hosting European diplomats, human rights activists, and remind you, this is a country where insulting Turkishness is illegal. This man is a badass. I was there in 2013, joining him at a genocide conference he organized. It was incredible. It was the first of its kind, 98 years after the genocide. And it just so happened that outside of that conference, the Gezi Park protest broke out. A protest to save a park. A protest that we had nothing to do with. I was with him that day. We were together for the conference, not the protest, but governments find a way, because it was that Gezi Park protest they charged him for without any reason. Well, maybe being a cultural surgeon in the kingdom of silence is the reason. Maybe that's the most dangerous thing of all.
Another knock.
Ah, that's why I'm thinking about Osman right now.
Sona picks up a puppet
Because-
from the floor and speaks to her.
Osman does what these puppets do, and while I can't free Osman, I can help free you. I can help you be Azad.
Another knock. Sona quickly packs up the puppets in the trunk. She slams the trunk lid closed. A human shadow is cast on the wall. Miss Tatoyan, we heard you have discovered some Syrian heritage. How wonderful. We'd love to help you register them with the Syrian Archaeological Society for safekeeping.
Wow, how did you hear?
This is Aleppo. The walls have ears.
Of course. Yes, I found my great-great-grandfather's puppets, and much like his puppets, who are multicultural, my great-great-grandfather, Akkad Kanajian, was ethnically Armenian. He was a citizen of the Ottoman Empire and performed his shows in Turkish, and then had to flee and rebuild a life here in Aleppo, where he continued to perform.
Excuse me, I'm going to start talking now. Okay, the puppets are Syrian, right? So we really encourage you to register them with the Syrian Archaeological Society.
Well, my great-great-grandfather was an artist, and art is not about borders, it's actually about transcending them.
That's a very nasty answer. You're a very nasty person. We hope, for the sake of the puppets, you register them with the Syrian Archaeological Society so they stay safe. Otherwise, who knows what might happen.
I see. For sure, the great country of Syria was gracious enough to let my ethnically Armenian great-great-grandfather, a citizen of the Ottoman Empire who performed his shows in Turkish, rebuild his life here. But I suppose you're not asking me to cut my great-great-grandfather into 3 parts.
The door shuts.
Had I registered them with this Syrian agent? Had they become a part of the Syrian Archaeological Society? I would have been arrested for what I'm about to do.
Oh, fuck, Sona. What the fuck are you about to do?
I will start with Noubar. Noubar, I think you did see the play in full. I would like to hear from you as to what your response was to either the play or just the parts that we just heard, and how did you guys view that?
Well, so first, thanks for having me. It's a little unusual setting for me to be in, but here I am. So I met Sona when she was actually experimenting with the play through the American Repertory Theater. I have some friends there, and they said, "Oh, you really should meet this young Armenian artist who's talking about the puppet stories and this." And I thought, wow. So in fact, she's going to have a presentation of this like in a couple of weeks. So I had heard about her, but I didn't know who she was. So I went to see it, and it was quite moving in its then form. It's morphed a lot. I have no idea. Plays go through kind of experimentation the way scientific things do. And it was unrecognizably different when I saw it in San Francisco. But the essence was there, but for me it was very, very mutated, let's say. And look, I think that different people experience this play different ways. I come from a family also of genocide survivors. I lived 20 years of my life in the room of somebody whose brothers were taken away not once but twice. I lived in her room once from when she was 75 to when she was 95. So you can imagine a 20-year-old living with a 95-year-old. And she was this brilliant person, completely the most important person in my life. And she was, during the genocide, living initially outside of Istanbul, in Adapazarı, then went to Istanbul when they tried to escape. And she firsthand, meaning her brothers obviously escaped and she knew exactly what happened, had both instilled in me and my two brothers, on the one hand, this sense that we can't just obsess over what happened, but really what are we going to do about it? And also kind of this rich history of what the Armenian culture was also in Turkey. Minor things Sona probably doesn't know, or maybe she does. Peter Balakian's uncle, Grigoris Balakian, who became an archbishop later, and his life was saved by my grandfather. A story that in his book he tells, and in my grandfather's memoirs, is the exact opposite story of how they saved this guy who was a priest. It was very awkward in the train. So that's a whole other thing. I called him in the middle of the night one night and I said, I hope you realize that this was my grandfather. Anyway, so, you know, when you go through that kind of, let's say, transmitted trauma, and when you grow up in Lebanon, where I grew up, you have to realize Lebanon trauma is not spoken about, it's like reenacted. So from probably around when I was 6 years old, pretty much all Armenian kids used to, on April 24th, get put on white t-shirts, then put red paint, and go outside the Turkish embassy and protest. You know, in the beginning we had no idea what we were protesting. Later on as you grow up, but this kind of generational trauma transmittal is pretty rough stuff. And then of course Civil War happened in Lebanon, and I felt like, okay, well, here we go again. And so the reason I say that is that my experience of this play is quite different, I'm sure, and everybody's is, depending on the lives they've lived. But it was quite evocative, it was quite kind of immersive, a lot of different streams. Yeah, I really, when it's shown again, not if, I think I would encourage people to go see it. So, and then I've seen kind of the work she's doing, which really isn't about the play or the art, but it's this kind of healing process. So yeah, that's how we met.
That's incredible that your grandfather's
Yeah, I have a good connection.
Yeah, I response to that. I mean, it was I would say we met at also a very powerful moment. It was in September of 2023, the exact week where Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh, was ethnically cleansed. I mean, it was a very wild sort of turn of events that I was developing this piece at Harvard Art Lab, ART, with in this moment, delving into 20 years of field work and research around my relationship with Armenian genocide and these stories where there was something very similar that was happening in real time, and so it just felt really potent to meet you at that moment. That's what I would say. A very kind of karmic entity.
So I would like to hear from you now about storytelling a little bit. I mean, Sarah's lab, the whole framework is the storytelling and its importance. I would like to discuss a little bit the role of storytelling specifically that you see in healing, and maybe a bit more provocatively. I was wondering if you see storytelling as not a substitute for justice. I don't want to be that provocative, but can healing and reconciliation happen in the absence of working through the past in a very honest way, just by storytelling? If it's too cryptic, I can open it up, or I will leave it to you to interpret.
I'll respond a little bit, and we
Yeah,
can just
okay.
sort of. So I would say it's not quite true to say storytelling heals. I mean, storytelling is a technology. I mean, it's a tool. How it's wielded is very important. I mean, Goebbels was a storyteller. You know what I mean? It's like how you use story can hurt, or it can heal. It can harm, or it can heal. And so I would say that. And I would say that we are, as human beings, all storytellers. We navigate the world through story. I mean, you have a story about yourself, where you come from, who you are, your identity. All of these are stories, that we make up, and then we live within them. And we create stories about others, we're constantly having opinions about what you're wearing. All of these things are stories. And it's interesting for me because I also have a very deep kind of practice in terms of meditation. And it's very ironic because that's about, seeing through stories, what are the stories we're telling right now. So it's this interesting, paradoxical space, and that's what I would say to the first part of your question. Of like, I think it's very important, the stories that we tell, and a lot of storytelling, the media is divisive. It's divisive storytelling. It's creating more us than narratives, and I yearn to see a world where we create stories that don't contribute to polarization, but that actually contribute to like our common humanity and see collaboration and cooperation. How do we develop stories like that, you know, that see the goodness in us, not the differences between us. And, that's what I'd say.
But I know you mentioned before this event that you have some projects in Armenia that includes narrative or storytelling, not maybe for reconciliation purposes, but for dealing with trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure. So, as Sona said, I'll go back to kind of connect it to how I got involved remotely in this space. So, in 2014, as we were approaching the centennial of the Armenian genocide, one of the questions we're together with a couple of quite important friends, but friends, nevertheless personal friends, we were wondering, what do you do with the centennial of genocide? And of course, people commemorate, people mourn, people demand justice, and all of that is pretty crowded space, because there's a lot of people who do that. And we thought, well, what could we do that's different? And what we decided was that we should flip the script, literally, on not focusing, and I'll connect it to the question you asked, but not focusing on the two main actors in a genocide, which is the perpetrators and the victims, but the two actors that get relatively less attention, but there's many more of them, which is saviors and survivors. Now, of course, with the Holocaust, because there was a lot more reporting, etc., there was a lot of storytelling afterwards about saviors and survivors. The Armenian genocide, since for 50, 60 years, it was completely ignored or suppressed. And most Armenians who survived literally suppressed it in order not to pass on the experience, at least from what I've understood. Nevertheless, so we thought we focused on that. So the question is, what do? Do you go do research on people who help people? We didn't want to do that. So we decided the same act that saved my grandfather and his brother and hundreds of thousands of other people, or at least thousands, is being repeated today. Just not in Eastern Turkey or Anatolia, but actually in Burundi, in Myanmar, in Congo, in all these places, where people are just stepping in and saving other people's lives. So we thought we would create a humanitarian initiative, enterprise, to identify people who are saving lives of thousands and tens of thousands of people right now, but who are representatives of the people who saved our ancestors' lives. So we created this project, or humanitarian initiative. The other two people were Vartan Gregorian, the late Vartan Gregorian, who was the head of Carnegie Corporation and New York Public Library, and President Brown, and quite a important figure in American life. And Ruben Vartanian, who's a very dear friend, a philanthropist, much like Osman Kavala, and had directed his resources from the financial world to philanthropy, and he and I together for 25 years have done many, many projects. And so it was the three of us who started this. Parenthetically, I'll mention that Ruben currently sits in jail in Baku, much like Osman Kavala, on trumped-up charges, just like Osman Kavala, and it's really torture for me personally, but others, to see this happen in 2025. But, so the connection to it is in 2020, there was a bit of a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I say bit of one because it didn't have a resolution, and then 2023, basically the Armenians living at the time in this enclave got ethnically cleansed, ran away to Armenia, and basically there we were. This is when he was and many other people were arrested. After that, Armenia, in modern Armenia, was basically set back 100 years and was in this traumatic state. We did surveys at the time, along with many other projects that I do there, and about 60% of the people were clinically depressed, by any measure. And a bunch of them were dealing with trauma, their neighbors, their relatives, they lost members of the family, they lost limbs. And so the question is, like, in that country, first of all, dealing with these issues, there are lots of people who are trained kind of psychologists and therapists, but it wasn't clear the scale was going to be there. So we thought, okay, what can we do among many other projects to help? So because of all these years of studying post-genocide surviving and thriving and journey, I got interested in this whole notion of how do you take people on a revival journey. So in my own amateur mind, I've always viewed surviving as a precondition to reviving, which if you're lucky enough to get out of, you get into striving, and then you get into thriving, if you're really going to persist in your life. That journey, which I made up those words in terms of that sequence, very little is written about, even though when I was a teenager I learned about death and dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, and many other people who've fascinatedly described how people accept death, but relatively few people have really studied the journey of this, at least that I could find. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity, let's see if we can put together some ideas. So we took post-traumatic narrative therapy, which was being developed a lot in Australia and several other places, and we thought, how do you make this acceptable to ethnic Armenians who have their own beliefs, etc., for whom, little no secret, nothing in the world matters because everything Armenians do has to be done in their own way. And so we thought, okay, can we hybridize the psychosocial side with a spiritual side? And by spiritual, we didn't just mean religious spiritual, we just meant the collection of narratives from our history, of all the trauma we've gone through, and how we've persisted, and how we've gone through Persian domination, and you name it, like we've been dominated over for thousands of years. We've been around for like 6,000 years, plus or minus. And so, most recently, genocide. So we thought, what if we take the spiritual side, the survival spirit, and storytelling, and merge it with psychosocial support? And so we created this project. It's called the Armenian Spiritual Revival Foundation. It's not that big. We improvised. We tried to figure out how to create a new technology. We tried with people carefully, because one of the things you don't want to do is make mistakes, even though this was new. And long story short, what emerged is what is essentially a group therapy approach. We were told emphatically, I talked to lots of experts, that you cannot help people with post-traumatic stress with group therapy. It's got to be individualized, very personal. And we thought, well, we're not going to do individualized because we can't produce enough people to do this. So we decided to try group. And the narrative part helps in a group thing. And what it became clear after a while was that you needed to help people who weren't deeply, deep clinical depression out of this, but who were kind of going kind of in that direction, help them create a narrative of how it is that they then become successful in reviving and striving. So if they can describe their future and what happened to them in ways that they needed words for, it helps a lot. We brought in people who are from the theater world. We brought in a whole lot of psychosocial, 75, 80 psychologists in Armenia. A lot of priests joined, somewhat reluctantly at first. Most left, some stayed, and contributed a lot of know-how of the history. So long story short, I'm going to come talk about this here. We've now gone, there's about 4,500 people there who've gone through these programs. We've iterated, we've brought in external experts to help tell us whether what we're doing is wrong or whatever. So it's a journey, but there's no doubt, to me, that this narrative approach is the only way to give people a way to help themselves and the society around them, because the people around them who kind of feel pity for them also need words to help them come out of this. And we could see this in a laboratory setting as we try these different sessions. So.
Would you think that it is also healing for you?
You know, yeah. So, of course.
We were all also
of course.
affected. I mean, all of us are descendants of genocide survivors, but then we did the arts closed in September of 2023. Things got triggered in us, and we also needed, maybe clinically not impressed.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, most of what I do because A, of my great aunt.
This is the person with...
Yeah, Armenian-Israeli-American is her name. And I do because of her, and also, of course, it's kind of healing, and you can't help. I would say healing is this interesting thing where however much healed you get, you still need healing, I find. And the only other thing like that that I've learned in my life is gratitude. So Aurora's main mantra is gratitude in action. Because one of the things I realized is that if you want to help other people, this feeling of gratitude is also insatiable in that if you express your gratitude in action, other people get infected and become the beneficiary. Now they feel gratitude to what you gave them, whether it's saving their lives or helping them. And your gratitude doesn't diminish, like the next morning you wake up, you still feel the same gratitude. And so it's a perpetual, just like healing, to me it's a perpetual need, and it's a perpetual thing you can help with. So yes, it certainly is a healing process, but I don't know that I consciously do it for that. But I'll tell you the weirdest thing, and it's like kind of a weird thing to say, I've never really talked about any of this stuff in my life, but I'll tell you that during COVID, it was even more surreal, because like all my life I had spent protesting that 1.5 million Armenians died, and justice, etc., etc. And I found myself at a moment trying to actually save 1.5 million people through the work we were doing. And the juxtaposition was like excruciating, because on the one hand you feel like, you know, you don't want to think about the two things, but the notion, and there was actually an article I never will forget in Turkish papers, many of them, who basically was about how my ancestors were in Turkey, and if there wasn't a genocide, I would have still been there, and they would have had both vaccine makers, the folks at BioNTech and the folks at Moderna, who were both from Turkey. No, and they meant it, by the way. It was a very interesting realization. I wanted them to realize that, because I would have been there. I wouldn't have been here.
Like Darmacamoglu too, in a way.
Darmacamoglu too, exactly. So anyway, when these personal things get intermixed with your professional life, or your philanthropic professional life, it does feel a little awkward, but it's all some form of healing.
Which I would like to return to after I ask the question to Sona, which is related to, I mean, feel free to respond to this, maybe, because it is so much in line with what you are doing at your personal healing journey, maybe, through art, but also what you want to spread out to the world, to your own healing process and share with it, through art. And then I have another question.
What's your question?
The other question is about the silence, which is possibly the opposite of telling
Right.
and talking. And you talked about the kingdom of silence and the culture of searching, is that?
Yes.
So I want to connect some of these threads together.
Yes.
The way that I process it is like, there are also some juxtapositions and conflicts there. So for instance, you grow up in the United States without hearing about from your own family.
Right.
The silence was from the family, they didn't talk about it. The genocide that at school there wasn't teachers, they didn't know. And this was in Indiana.
I grew up in rural Indiana, they didn't even know what Armenians were.
Yeah.
There was no house back then, or, tabula, and it was like late 80s, early 90s, So.
Yes. That, but you are also saying that before the age of 5, Turk was an insulter,
Right.
which means that you did hear some stories.
In Aleppo, yes.
Yes, and the place where you were cursed also,
Yes.
right? Because you were relevant. But in Indiana, you were irrelevant. There is silence. Maybe you could pass, maybe you couldn't pass as
White.
white.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, you also don't have it, and you were born there.
I was born in Baltimore, so yeah.
Anyways, I want to connect this and then the framework of this childhood in which there is some conflicting things about do you know, do you not know? You know there's some bad actors out there because you go to someplace else,
Yes.
you learn about it, and then you come to this America sanitized,
Yeah.
no buzz, no noise, it's
Yeah.
too quiet almost, silent. And then you encounter Turks in your adult life, which then initiate.
Yeah.
I mean, not initiate, I don't know what to call it,
Yeah.
but at least empower you
Right.
to take your work to another stage, which then a little bit and free you maybe, right? Like an azad, the play is,
That's what it means, free.
maybe you can connect it to that theme.
Yeah.
I might come to Noubar after this, what
Yeah.
freedom means, what does
Yeah.
freedom from suffering mean,
Yes.
and its connections to healing. So
Yeah.
keep from, and we can also do the Osman Kabbalah and the whole
Yeah.
Turkey context, right? Like the
Yes.
authoritarian repressive regime locking up one of its most progressive and wealthy. I mean, maybe for context, Osman Kabbalah is one of the wealthiest individuals.
Yes.
Right, in Turkey, a big donor, but also a very successful businessman. who sits in jail, serve time.
He's so far been supposed to be life in prison. I don't believe, I'm too much of optimist to believe that. I can't go there, but anyway.
Yeah. So he breaks the silence for you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so, I mean, I'm first generation, right? So I was the first member of my family born in this country. Both my parents were born in Aleppo. They came as immigrants. My father came on a Red Cross refugee visa from Beirut in the late 60s with $68 in his pocket, and literally lived that bootstrapped, did the whole American, became a surgeon, all of this. So I kind of come on the first generation on that, and I ended up growing in rural, like, we were in Alabama. Like, I was 4 years old and we moved to Alabama because my father really wanted to serve the people. And in a town that was like 3,000 population, so we didn't even have a McDonald's, and the hospital closed down, and then we moved to this town in Indiana with 8,000 people, so we had a McDonald's. I mean, it was just, and that's where I consider largely, like when I say where I grew up, because we were there till I was 15, and then there was this deep desire to be around an Armenian community, so we moved to Los Angeles, because my parents wanted to like have us be around, experience that. But meanwhile, my connection to my Armenianness, let's say, was Aleppo. So I had been going there since I was 9 months old, which is the beginning of the story that I told here, with my mom. And every summer of my life, I would go to Aleppo. So it was this very kind of schizophrenic, Aleppo is like considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. And it's this like, cacophony of sounds, multilingual cultures, colliding, and colors of it I would see, in that kind of visual, sort of shades of beige and desert and all this, and then rural Indiana, flat cornfields, multicolored, and we would spend these summers there, 3 months in Aleppo with my grandparents, and that's where my Armenian, I'm fluent in Western Armenian is my mother tongue. It's primarily because of that deep immersion there, and my mother's insistence that we speak it at home. And so I would go, and that's where I heard about this. I heard about it in Aleppo from my great aunt, who was like very fierce about it. She would take me to the corner. And I was born, I would say, like almost an investigative journalist. Like I would be questioning things all the time. I mean, I have a story that my uncle would tell, and he would say, everything we would say to you, you would say, inshu, and then we would answer, and then he would say, inshu, which means why in Armenian. So it's asking. And so she kind of felt that, and she would tell me these stories, and I could feel that they were true. And she would say, make Kharpet, we're from Kharpet, or make Urfa, we're from Urfa, and be naming these, ancestral villages and towns in Anatolia. And then I would come back to the States, and I would go to school, and I was always been a bit of a nerd, and I would get my history book, I was in public school in Indiana, and on the first day of school, I would go to the World War I section. She told me it happened in 1915, and there would be no mention, and I would go, this is something maybe I'm not seeing it. I would turn to the index. It's such a visceral memory for me. And I would go to the A, and there's no Armenian, and I remember being 7 years old and going, this book is a lie. Like, because it just felt, I knew what the truth was experientially. And so there was this like really deep planting and seeding and understanding of narrative from like very, very like kind of formative. And then I spent a lot of time, simultaneous to that, I would be taking sandwiches of zaftan to school, and just this kind of sesame, an olive oil paste, my mother would make, which I loved. And I remember first year, the boy next to me, sitting next to me in lunch, one day looked over and said, "Ew, you're eating shit." It's the first time I heard the word, and the shame felt from it. But I loved the food, and I didn't want to hurt my mom's feelings. So it was like this whole like mix of complicated, So I never told her, and I would eat it out of shame. I would like hide my sandwich on the table and take a bite, So this very complicated relationship to my culture. I didn't want to be Armenian. I didn't want to speak it made me different. I didn't look like Sarah and Heather in rural Indiana. I felt ostracized. And it was when I got cast in the school play when I was 8 years old to play play Alice in Wonderland. They heard me singing, and I was this deeply shy, introverted kid, but I did it. And I had the solo to sing, and I sang it. And there was this moment where I was like, I belong, you know, there was this, so it was always story that kind of helped me, you know, and theater, and I was often full of, you know, misfits, and, you know, and so that's where I was. There was this family and belonging. It was very complicated, so I was like, I needed to tell the truth about what happened, but I felt ashamed about what happened. I mean, it was this very complex kind of collision of things. And so, you know, that's been the formation for me. But what sat with me for a long time was this deep understanding that story is power and power is story. And so whoever holds the story has that power, and whoever has the power continues to tell that story. And we see that replicated in the world today with the news. Who holds that narrative? And so when I started this nonprofit, I went to Turkey. I was married at the time, and I was like, let's go to Turkey for the honeymoon. Let's go to the ancestral. Who does that, right? Let's go to Anatolia. And like, the person I married was like, okay. I mean, crazy. This was not, he wasn't Armenian, he was Puerto Rican. It was 2005, and I have crazy stories that I'm not going to get into. But I went with a lot of rage, you know? I was like, this is where this happened. And like, and I remember we were sitting somewhere on Tatoyan's honeymoon, and the woman that comes to serve us, and she's like, oh, don't you love Turkey? It's beautiful. I'm like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, I can understand. And people say, you know, look at this place. It's, you know, they say we're barbarian. We've never done a single thing that's barbarian. And I remember, like, the blood running up through, coursing through my body. And my husband was, like, looking at me like, oh, no, you know, what is she going to do? You know, it's like, kick me under the table. And it was just this, like, deeply, and I went to Ani, you know, if any of you know, it's just 10th century, like, it used to be called the city of 1,001 churches. I think it was the capital of one of the Baghdadi Empire, I think. And now it's an empty field, you know, raised from like one dilapidated church. And outside, there's Armenian writing on the stone wall. And the guy gave me the tour was like, yes, that's ancient Turkish. And I turned and I was like, wow, I never knew I could read in ancient Turkish. You know, so it was like all of this, right? And then there was this deep, and I started meeting this sort of spiritual practice and sort of very emotional, and it's kind of meeting these Eastern teachings, which began to open something up for me around how to heal and how to turn towards pain. And that's kind of the way you heal, is to be with things, you have to fix it with your mind, but to be able to just be with darkness and allow light to come out of that, you know. And so I had this feeling that this story has to be told with both Turks and Armenians. This story has to be told, but it has to be told. It can't be just like, look at what happened to us. It has to be, this is a story that belongs to both cultures. You know, we are the progeny of, you know, people that survived or didn't survive, and then the modern day Turks are the progeny of perhaps perpetrators of that. You know, and so we're on kind of some opposite sides of this one thing, and so we need to do it together. And it was at that moment when I met Osman Kavala, and I was like, wow, you exist, you know? And he was supporting all these cultural dialogue projects and funding, you know, exhibitions and all kinds of things, and cinema, Armenian-Turkish cinema platform, literally bringing artists from both sides together to create. You know, I mean, I always say creation is the antidote to destruction. Destruction is not the antidote to destruction, which seems to be the MO in the world, but it's creation. And so to bring people together to do that was a profound, like I just was in awe that a person like this existed. And he immediately began to support my work. And it was, I mean, I would just sit there and be shocked about it. And, you know, Armenians, Kurds, I mean, he was helping all kinds of people, you know? It's like, I thought it was just, it's weird when you see people, oh yeah, he did this for me. He is in prison right now, literally still doing projects, like literally still helping artists. I mean, it's just remarkable. And so that was a massive transformation to understand. I could no longer just hate Turkey, hate Turkishness, because in front of me was a man who was Turkish, who was doing this. And so it was like a brain scramble, you know. It was like a pain scramble, actually. It was no longer this binary thing, right? And the pain and the rage, and had to begin to transform. And it was like, wow, there's a humanity under this. And to go back to like what's necessary, I think Osman has felt so acutely that because he comes from that culture, like it's a responsibility, you know. And him being so open to that was like, okay, like we can do this together. And he acknowledges that this thing's happened 100 years ago, where his countrymen, or others have not. They continue to deny, and the opening that creates for the possibility to heal. There has to be that acknowledgement, the acknowledgement, and then something. It's part of what a river starts to happen. So.
Anything that you want to add to this, or?
No, it's good.
Yeah. I'm going to open up the floor to questions in a couple of minutes, but I want to, I have so many questions, and I'm contemplating myself, because I myself am a Turkish Armenian. I'm an Armenian from Turkey, like nothing, right? The other person that you were
Yes.
talking about, which is, it is interesting because for us, like we grow up with Turks, we don't have that binary as such, even though we have limits of how much you can fully be part of the larger society, what you can speak, what you cannot speak, what is self-silence, you need to self-silence at some point, but at the same time, in the home especially, you grow up knowing about the memories of, you know what is private, what is public, so those definitions. I wanted to ask Noubar to you then, in this context, as an Lebanese-Armenian-Canadian-American, sorry, what was it? It is long, that's why. Armenian-American, let's say. So how has it been for you in, I mean, I don't want to say dealing with the Turks, but like doing either business with them or collaborating with them, maybe through this art project, reconciliation stuff, or just vaccine, like what you do with Moderna. Do you ever do these two things, like your scientific work and corporation and your ethnic identity and your past? Do they ever intersect in interesting ways?
I haven't really had business dealings per se, nor have I avoided them. I do have friends who are Turkish. I met Osman Kavala because he came to one of the Aurora events in Armenia, and so he was a special guy. I don't think I spent 3 days with him a few weeks before he died in Armenia, so that was a whole other experience. He was quite he was as Armenian as he was Turkish. He wanted me to understand just how much he thought that's a unity. It's not a separate issue. It's quite, maybe that's for another time. It's gonna sound weird, but in 2015, I asked the heads of our church to forgive Turkey. It's the Christian thing to do. They thought they'd be killed if they did that. The reality is, I don't have any issue forgiving people for that's what you're supposed to do. I don't have, I actually, if it was up to me, I would want to help them try to come to grips with their history as opposed to me forcing them to do that, because that's a justice issue. Justice is not going to force anybody to actually reconcile with what happened. And so I'm in a different place. I don't, I would consider a good friend Hamdi Ulukaya, who is the founder and CEO of Chobani. Hamdi is on the selection committee of the Aurora Prize, which exists to commemorate people who were saviors during the Armenian genocide. He is also the head of the Turkish-American Chamber of Commerce, and he is very much one of the pride of Turkey economically in the U.S. And look, I think anybody, Hamdi does a lot of philanthropy, the Tent Project, etc. Anybody who has empathy actually feels the pain that Armenians feel around this issue, and lament the fact that they can't change their society to actually make peace with it so they can move on. So, I think this is something that hopefully, time and generations and coexistence will heal. But the more it's denied actively as it is today, for political reasons, the more it will make it worse for them and for individuals, because you can't, in order to deny, you have to hide. And then the more effort you put in hiding, the more it causes you more trauma. So there are actively people who are being traumatized there to try to deny things. And so anyway, that's not like, but I feel like, I can't do anything about it other than openly find nothing. So I don't, of course I grew up feeling something. This was interesting. My only memorable contacts, there's been many occasions where I actually met Turks in the context of business or let's say science. And what's odd about it is that often they'll tell me that they're actually Kurds, not Turks, and that they didn't commit genocide. Which is I don't know if any of you in Armenians have seen this, it's the most weird frame. The reality, oddly enough, is that actually the Turks used the Kurds to commit much of the crimes and the pilfering, but it wasn't their idea. So I just feel like that also must be torture for them, because like imagine having to say to some random scientific person that you're, so for those of you either Americans or from different parts of the world, this might all seem like the surreal play that Sona was reading you about puppets and stuff, but this is the world we're trapped in. And so, and look, we actively pass this on to our kids, not voluntarily, not to harm them, but I have 4 kids, they're Armenian and Swedish. They feel the pain of everything every day that we've gone through. And so I sometimes wonder whether I did them good enough, but you know what, it defines them and it gives them some differentiation in the lives they're living, so.
And I don't think it's a choice. I mean, I myself, of course, struggled with this idea of what to pass, what to not pass, what part of the Turkishness to pass, for instance, both in terms of language and all that. But I came to the humble recognition that whatever you do, even if you keep it quiet, you pass it somehow. You talk about it, they become obsessed about it. So it is just the way that it is, you accept it. And then you do your best in your own ways to either heal or come to terms with your context. And I really, it also has to the way that you comes out.
I'll also say that I do think, not to make this too grandiose, but it has been a huge motivation subconsciously to me.
Yes.
And probably if I didn't have these things to reconcile, I probably wouldn't quite feel this way or want to do things. So, I mean, if you want to paint it in a positive way, you don't want to go through this just to do the positive stuff. But there's a lot of people who go through these kinds of things that if they can get through it, feel this great sense of burden to do something about it, and that's good in a way.
Yeah, and also that is exactly the narrative, the importance of narrative. Like I myself, how many times, when I first came to the United States, I was alone, I had so many difficulties, and I would think about my grandmother, like how they survived in this post-genocide Turkey, and I would feel empowered. I can do this. And I need to do it. This is my responsibility. Like it's a package of meaning that it's out there for you to grab. So it is also a gift. Yeah, which I think comes to a good circle, and we can open up on this. You want to add something to this? So we have some time for questions. Do we need a microphone or not?
You can try.
Yes, there is a microphone here. Judy Saryan, first question. Yes.
So yeah, I'm very interested in this conversation about healing, and I did hear, from your comments from all of you that healing happens in different ways, and I just wanted to hear more about, okay, this is the question. Like when you with the Aurora Prize and then with the narrative and the play, do you have people coming up to you and say, this has really changed my life. The work that you're doing has really changed me. I just wonder if that is part of the healing for you, or if that it actually, do you see those, that kind of impact, and that people are willing to talk about it? That's my question.
Yes. We were able to have the world premiere of this play in San Francisco this past spring, and we had a limited run of 3 weeks. Every night people were coming up with various, needing to share, how this, oh my God, my family, this, oh my God. I mean, the play, has many threads, right? And it's kind of dealing with cultural, familial, and very deeply personal trauma, and all of them kind of come from the same place. And so we couldn't address all of those things in what I shared tonight, but women would come up to me and to say, oh my God, this thing happened to me too, and this is how can I do this, how can I confront this? And that is very, to know that it's having, because that's why I do the work, to be able to, when you're vulnerable, and that's what art, it's about kind of getting into the heart space and touching people in that space, not the intellect. It allows other people to kind of get into their own vulnerability and see things about themselves that are hard to articulate, and so that's very gratifying, to know, because that's why I do. My father wanted me to be a doctor so much. He's a doctor, and my whole life it was like, you can do the play if you get straight A's. It was kind of like a bargaining thing that I had to do. And now it took him a long time to deal with the fact that I didn't go in that direction. And now he's like, I see. You're healing on the soul, and that to me is like, to have my father kind of get to that place of seeing that. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, Dad. I did what you wanted me to do, but from a different, angle. And so it's very humbling, and it just, I don't know. It's like I just love humanity. We this heart that we can all come from, and what art can do, and how art can open us up in that way.
The only thing I'll add is just, the Aurora project, because it's so fiercely not about Armenians today, based on the roots of the Armenian experience. We've had thousands of people who have actually ended up going to Armenia as part of this process. And what's really gratifying, it's an interesting word, given that we believe in gratitude in action, so I guess receiving some of it is good too, is the way in which Yazidis, from Iraq, who went through this incredible trauma with ISIS, people from Myanmar, different places, uniformly would say, wow, you guys have done so much to heal yourselves in Armenia, from the genocide memorial to the stories that they heard, and they actually got uplifted with the hope, especially from Rwanda. There's a lot of people from Rwanda who came. And so the notion that Armenians could actually serve as an example, which we never really think of ourselves as, because we never want to give up needing support and help and empathy for people, but when you actually start serving as an example to people who are behind us in that journey, that is a hell of a different feeling. That is a healing feeling. And we helped, I think we've helped through Aurora about 6 million people in like 65 countries. And a lot of those people, basically just like in the orphanages in Gyumri and other places where there were Armenian-American orphanages, and remember the old pictures with little people saying, "Thank you, America." Well, I can show you people who are thanking Aurora, the prize, the project in Burundi, in Congo, and different places. And that kind of cycle is in de facto healing, because those people now are kind of standing back up, and then we try to just tell them, like, pay it forward. Don't thank me, thank some unsuspecting person. And so, yeah, I think it's but I must say, in a way, I feel uncomfortable with this notion that what we're doing is helping them heal. Unlike Sona, who's a professional healer, I'm like at best an accidental healer, and I don't know kind of how to conceptualize what that's about. I see doctors who are healers, and I work in medicine, but the notion that some of this philanthropic humanitarian activity could have that effect is almost embarrassing. It's going to sound weird to admit. So I kind of usually cut it short and I say, well, just pay it forward and then move on, because I don't that's not what I'm kind of used to dwelling in.
Yeah, please.
All right, well, thank you both very, very much for opening up and close to my experience and my heart. And one of the thoughts that comes to mind is, here we are, 100 and something years after the act, and we're still healing, and we're still talking about it, trying to address this trauma. So what's happening in my country today, how long will it take, right? How many more decades will this, will the consequences be felt? And in terms of healing, you're talking about narratives and you're talking about storytelling, but is there also other stages of healing, right? And at which stage this narrative does come in and it's helpful, here it is 100-something years on, maybe there's time for that, but is there time for righteous anger? Is there time to establish facts? Is there time to say, no, I do not forgive, because it's too much to ask at this point? What are other stages of healing processes? It just seems that it's a lot to ask of people who are in this atrocity at the moment to say, okay, just tell the stories and get over it.
Of course, yeah, that's not the directive, of course, and all those things. I mean, in my own life, I've spent my entire life like deconstructing, dismantling, all of this, and it's cyclical. It's not linear. This journey, it's very much elliptical, I would say, and my understanding of it, and I've gone through maybe every single healing modality you could ever imagine, which is reflected in sort of the insights I've had in my work, and everything from like regular therapy to somatic experience, and to sitting with psychedelic integration coaching, and that's kind of at the forefront of healing trauma right now, and modalities like yoga, because trauma is really body and breathing and all everything. And again, it's not linear. Pieces you'll understand, and other things will come back up. But the thing I've come to, and I had this crazy epiphany, which is a line at the end of my play. I've been obsessed with sort of telling the story of the Armenian genocide, and justice of that, and denial, and all this. And then one day I realized my grandparents were all from different villages. And at the time, my understanding is that people from the village they were in married people from the village they were in. They didn't marry people in other villages. Well, I'm actually exist, like the person who's sitting in front of me, because of the genocide. Like, I wouldn't be here to deal with the inheritance of genocide if it wasn't for, you know what I mean? And so there's this paradoxical thing, and the puppets for me were very illustrative of that. Like, light and shadow coexist in this experience of being human. They just do. Like, in this reality that we live in, wherever there is shadow, it means there was a source of light. Wherever there is light, shadow's going to be cast. And so the more we work through things and, kind of begin to hold space for like the whole of it, I think is what healing starts to veer us towards. It's like that's where we begin to orient to the mess of it all, that it's not one day you're going to wake up and I'm healed, it's just being alive is this process, in my, humble understanding. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I won't add too much, just to say, I do think that healing is not going to end. And I do think that for generations, and it's hard to say how long, it'll be part of the story of Ukrainians, and frankly, it already is, because Ukrainians have scars from World War II, and all sorts of things, and so I don't think there's a kind of like an end to it. I think it's a natural process that gets incorporated into your cultural DNA, and as much as things that you experience physically get incorporated into your physical DNA, and it just kind of defines you going forward. And I think while you're consciously carrying it and dealing with it, if you can find a way to convert it into some good, whatever your definition of good is, it'll actually help you cope with it, and as opposed to actually heal. I do think healing is a bit of a mirage, at least in this regard, because these traumatic things, if you have memory, like amnesia would be a really good way of healing. Just like completely, literally, if you don't remember, And that's why people go into denial, because they don't want to remember. It's too painful to remember. And so I think in a way, I mean, like, I don't want to get into this here because this is a public audience, but I've always wondered what would have happened in Germany if they weren't forced to accept what happened because of Nuremberg trials, the way Turkey was not, even though they had some versions of trials, and then the rest of the Western countries just said, forget about it, just move on, it's okay. Because true healing on their society comes from actually denying and then accepting. But if you are forced to accept, did people really accept what happened in World War II? I don't know. I don't know. But if they did, I think they'd be much more traumatized than I've seen any evidence for as to what actually happened. So there's been a lot of forgetting, in my view, there, conveniently. And I think this is my own personal view. Again, I'm no expert, so I can say things. And without accountability, this is my personal opinion. I think that in the Ukrainian case, very interesting example. Literally, I came back from Armenia where I was last week. And one of the things we're thinking about is where else to try and in what time frame some of this kind of spiritual, psycho-spiritual revival journey. And of course we thought about Gaza. It's too fresh and it's too kind of difficult to imagine that being a place. But we thought maybe, Ukrainians in Poland. And what value could we really add to that, even now, even without the war being ended? So I think, but you might say, like, are we doing it for ourselves or are we doing it for them? The answer is kind of a mix, because if they can use that to try to do it for themselves and for others. So that's what I would say, but I don't think there is such a thing as like healing and forgetting. And then I think the forgiving and justice thing is also complicated. I think you can forgive and demand justice. Forgiving does not, in my view, imply that there are no consequences to what was done, but that's in the legal domain, that's not in the human domain. And I think you can forgive, frankly, for yourself, if that's what you want to do, but then you can demand justice. Those are not incompatible.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm Greek Cypriot. My family lived through the atrocities and displacement of when Turkey invaded in 1974. So a lot of the stories do resonate with me. I also have kids who went to spend the summer with their grandparents and heard stories. And I wonder whether that's good or not for them, but live with these stories that they heard. There's one experience that I thought is relevant to share here. My parents grew up in a village. That was a mixed village, had both Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. And the war happened, we were displaced, we couldn't go back for many years. But it's now 50 years since the invasion, but about 30 years after the invasion, Greek Cypriots were allowed to visit their homes for the day and see their homes. So Tom and I took my father to the village to see our ancestral home. And what was really interesting is that the Turkish Cypriots that he grew up with immediately saw us, came, invited us for coffee. We were sitting there until very late at night, and we wanted to leave because we had a long drive, trying to get a curfew and drive back. But it was as if nothing happened. So for me, it's societal healing versus individual one-on-one healing. And societal healing is incredibly difficult because there's so many other forces that are out of the control of the individuals. But the one-on-one healing is a lot easier to achieve.
Thank you all so much. I would raise just another aspect of healing, and also there's a lot of discussion of all of these traumas being in other places, and I think in this country we have our own huge trauma, which is of course the legacy of slavery. And my institution, Georgetown University, has gone through now almost a decade-long period of coming to grips with this history, which was long known to the Jesuits and the higher-ups, but came out in the New York Times in 2016, so it has been part of the story of the whole institution since then, that in 1838 there was a sale by the Jesuits running Georgetown of 304 individuals that raised the funds that kept this religious institution solvent and going. So we all at Georgetown owe a debt to those enslaved people. And it has been interesting to see the institution come to grips with that, and the students led what could have been, I think, a truly revolutionary form of reparations, but sadly the institution didn't have the courage to follow the students' lead. But they voted now about 5 years ago in the largest student referendum ever. This comes to the question of, well, gee, I'm not a slave owner. My family didn't own slaves. I don't have anything to do with this. The students put forward a referendum that every student at Georgetown would pay an extra. At that point, we thought there were 272 people in this sale. There turns out to have been more, but the idea was that every single student would pay an additional $27.20 each semester, and that would go into a fund that would be jointly managed by students, Georgetown faculty, administrators, and descendants. Very important, there are 10,000 now and counting descendants of this sale. And students held the most incredible debates about this. And there was all of this, well, my family didn't live in the South, my family didn't have slaves. The black students said, well, why should we pay? And it just came down to a very simple thing. We all benefit from this. We all are standing on the shoulders of those people. And, sadly, the university didn't have the courage to go forward with it. I think it would have really set the tone for discussions on reparations. But the university has done a lot, and there's not a student who graduates from Georgetown who doesn't know this story, who doesn't embrace it. So that's a kind of institutional way of dealing with this. And I think it's something, it's not just foreign, every American has this in them somehow. But I wanted to ask Noubar a question about American medicine relates to all this, how you put this all together with American medicine, because it just seems to me that this aspect, the emotional, narrative, empathy aspect of healing is so absent. And I don't know, I don't have a solution for this. I don't know why a cardiologist should be a storyteller. I don't know how it works, but it seems as if, if you have a problem with your wrist, no one will look beyond, your wrist. Maybe it goes all the way up to your elbow. Maybe it goes all the way up to your brain. Everything is so parceled. So I'm wondering, as someone who's done such advanced work in medicine, do you see any way that the mental and emotional aspects of healing can join the physical?
This is our last question.
Well, I think it's evident that these things are highly connected. The fact that Western medicine doesn't really delve into those things is a result of how it's evolved and how the system works, and the 5 minutes you can spend with the patient in that time, how are you going to actually care about those things? I will say a scary but interesting phenomenon would be what happens when you actually have AI enter into the picture, actually to provide what the doctors aren't providing, which is the contextual side of this, as opposed to the take this or do this. So in a weird way, everybody's obsessed over the comparability between an AI diagnostic and an AI treatment, etc., to a human. But if the human limits themselves to studying the wrist, and in a sense AI could provide you a more contextualized explanation plus a way to think about these things, maybe that will be an unexpected augmentation of the experience for a patient. Unless you think that's not happening, there's a massive amount of kind of companionship that people are seeking who are in need of medical support, but actually also in need of mental support to deal with the thing that they're confronting, not just because of innate issues, but the disease-related things. And I actually think in a weird way that humans will have to be more attentive to that when machines outdo them in being attentive to that. So that's at least what a technologist would look forward to.
Okay, the last word from Sona. I would like you to connect this question maybe to the silent meditation that you did. That's how we opened the whole. So, yeah, which is something that attends to the whole body.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's hard to articulate these things. It sounds so grandiose to say, but really, the most profound experience of being human, these past 6 weeks of, we are in a body. It's the body that's present, the body that's here. And when you sit in silence for so long, you start to see the deep interconnection between the mind and the body. Like, I've had a lower back pain for a number of years because of my broken foot and lumbar, which I never got to have physical therapy for. So it's kind of come up and and when I sit for long periods of time, it gets aggravated. And so I was like, oh, am I going to sit for like, hours and hours a day? And it was after a couple of weeks of sitting there, the pain was gone. This is like very counterintuitive. Like, how is it that sitting all, And I realized a couple of weeks later, some patterns of thought that were very disturbing came up, and the pain came back. Like, it was such a clear connection, right? It's like, oh my God, experiential. And we say that, oh, the mind and the body are connected. It's one thing to have that as a concept. It's another thing to have a deep, actual experience of it. And so we're walking around, kind of really not here, not present, not in our body, and you just wonder, what would happen if we all were able to be in this organism and move from that place. A lot of kindness becomes generated out of that, to yourself, to those around you, and generosity, which is, such a huge thing in the work that Noubar does in the world. It becomes a natural outpouring of yourself, all people. I mean, it is astounding to see this, I mean, yesterday I left a group of 46 people who, half of whom, the names I did not know, who I never looked at their face because the instruction is you're in noble silence, which means not just not talking, but you are not looking at each other, because the whole enterprise is to really be with yourself every single moment that you are awake, right? And so everything starts to become very, we're aligned together for meals, and by the end of the 6 weeks, people are taking each other's empty plates to wash them, just inside. I don't know who this person is. It becomes a natural occurrence, this deep care for one another. And it's so moving. I mean, I cried so much yesterday, leaving and seeing our potential, it's, yes, we have pain in this world. We have suffering, but we also have compassion. We also have kindness and love. We also have joy. And these are the things that are in every single one of us, no matter what has happened. And if you sit and you let silence and not this hyper-stimulated, overwhelming world disrupt your natural order, you can see that and then move from that place. It's just I just erupt into spontaneous feelings of joy at this, of being alive, even with all of the pain, We're alive. We're here right now in this moment, which will never be repeated ever again. in this configuration with these people sitting here. We don't know who will die like 5 minutes from now, but right now we're here. And it's precious, like it's so precious. And what we do with that, you know, and how we turn towards each other with that. And how we just see beauty. It was in New England, you know, upstate Western Massachusetts with this foliage changing and to be able to see these colors bursting and then watch over a six-week period these leaves leaving, you know, the trees and just, this is life. It's continuous, it's constantly moving, and it's precious because it exists. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and I will not say anything else. This is the best place to end. Thank you so much both for your
Thank you everyone for coming to this healing in its own way.